Hey kids, spoiler alert for all of Season 1 of The Haunting of Hill House, as well as the original novel, and mild spoilers for Flanagan's other works like Oculus, Hush, Before I Wake, Gerald's Game, and Dr. Sleep. And content warning for death, suicide, drug use, mental illness, disturbing imagery, and jump scares. They're going to happen. I'm going to spring them on you like this show sprung them on me. Also, here's my usual warning that these are my opinions, no matter how I choose to state them, and art is subjective. Okay, now with that out of the way. If you've been watching this channel for a minute, you might notice certain themes and tropes that I tend to like. A genre-bending show with strong female characters and cute sad boys that's also about trauma. Let's just say I have a type. So in October 2018, Netflix released the 10-episode series The Haunting of Hill House. Now let's talk about it. So, to start out, let me just say I am by no means an aficionado of the horror genre. In fact, I'm probably the opposite. My journey with this particular genre has been long and strange. When I was a kid, I got scared of Nickelodeon interstitials in the THX logo. I had to hold my mom or my sister's hands in certain aisles of a Blockbuster. To say that I was sensitive might be putting it mildly. This struck fear into my soul forever. To this day, I am so easily startled that when I got to see the Lightning Thief musical, like, it's in the title, but the first note of that show is a deafening thunderclap and a flash of lightning, and I jumped so hard I scared my friend, who was completely unbothered by the thunder and just startled by her friend jumping 10 feet in the air for no reason. When I finally began to stretch and watch scarier movies, it was always because there was some other fantastical element, like a fairy tale faun, or it was animated, or whatever. For many years, Coraline was the scariest movie I had ever seen in theaters, and I researched the hell out of it first, reading the book in order to spoil the ending so I could be mentally prepared for it, as well as watching whatever featurettes were available ahead of the film's release. In the last 3 or 4 years, I've stretched further, seeing movies like It Follows and The Witch on my laptop, curled up in bed with the lights on and occasionally shouting at my computer. In the last year or so, I've gone farther, seeing films like Get Out, Us, and Annihilation. I actually saw a couple of those in theaters, including It Chapter 2, and in that case I was mostly okay except for 1 or 2 particularly gross bits. Mostly I was there for Bill Hader making me sad, but I did really like it. And I am actually a recent and massive fan of the Happy Death Day franchise, and the sequel to it was so good, I cried. So while I'm a little better with horror, I still tend to enter a movie theater a little warily when it's around October because I know there will be large posters for upcoming horror films, and sometimes I don't like looking at those. I still tense up if a trailer for a horror film plays when I'm at the theater. So when I say The Haunting of Hill House was one of my favorite things I saw in 2018, I do want you to understand the implications of that. Because this is not my chosen genre. I don't like being scared. This is not the sort of show I normally watch. And yet one night, probably a month or 2 after the show was released, I'd heard enough interesting things online, so I turned the show on and sat captivated. I binged the entire thing and ended up weeping at 3 a.m. Since then, I've rewatched it, and I've gotten friends and family to watch it so we could talk about it because I like it so much. So without further ado, let's talk about Hill House. So The Haunting of Hill House is based on a 1959 novel of the same name by Shirley Jackson, and it is a very loose adaptation. And while we talk about the novel, these are clips from the 1963 film The Haunting, which is considered a more faithful adaptation, although they changed characters and plot points as well. The novel follows 4 characters: Dr. John Montague, a paranormal investigator; Eleanor Vance, a shy introvert who spent most of her life caring for her elderly mother; Theodora, an adventurous and tempestuous artist; and Luke Sanderson, the young heir to Hill House, who is often called a rake, or dashing. And I think those might just be 1950s terms for a fuckboy. Dr. Montague rents Hill House to investigate its paranormal properties and invites guests who have experiences with the supernatural, like Eleanor and Theodora. They are the only 2 who accept the invite, and the owner of the house basically begs off her nephew Luke, so he's there too. Also, Mr. and Mrs. Dudley are the house's very weird and creepy caretakers, and they live off-site because they refuse to stay in the house after dark. Once they've all arrived, Dr. Montague tells them all the history of the house, which involves a lot of the usual haunted house stuff, illness and death, etc. Then the occupants begin to experience supernatural encounters, most of all Eleanor, who the house seems to quickly single out. She starts to feel a bond with the house and might be losing touch with reality. Then we get a Mrs. Montague and her companion Arthur Parker, who is headmaster of a boys' school and a meat-and-potatoes manly man. They join the investigation, and they're really terrible and really into this Ouija-type thing called planchette. After Nell, in a trance, ends up accidentally endangering not only her own life but that of Luke, she is forced to leave. Finally, she gets in her car and drives. Not away into town, but directly into an oak tree where one of the original owners of the house died many years ago. In the end, it's unclear whether she was mentally ill or communing with the spirits of Hill House. But one thing is sure, the house stood ominously for 80 years and would stand for 80 more. In real life, Shirley Jackson lived the life of a repressed housewife with 4 children and her husband, literary critic and lecturer Stanley Hyman, who was often controlling and unfaithful to her. Many hail this novel to be an early work of feminist literature. The novel features themes of female repression and rage that some say were a reflection of Shirley Jackson's real life living in the 1950s, where women's experiences and thoughts were often undervalued. Nell spends much of the book agonizing over simply being seen and accepted by the other occupants of Hill House until she ascends beyond them and potentially gains new power from her connection to the house, which is then stifled when she's forced out by Luke and Dr. Montague. And the series took all those themes about the struggles of women to be seen and heard and made it about...
So, does this stuff capture the supernatural?
Don't believe in that word. I prefer preternatural.
Look, I like this show a lot, and a lot of elements from the book are here, but it's fair to say that this show took a piece of proto-feminist literature and made it about men. Stephen is probably the main character of this show. We begin and end with voiceover from him. The first episode follows him, and the last episode is bookended by extended sequences with him. A lot of Eleanor Vance's story is here, split between Nell and Olivia Crane, but the framing has changed. There isn't a sense of empowerment in their communion with Hill House. It is unambiguously making them a danger to themselves and others. Their deaths are the tragedies around which the show is devised. We eventually learn about their inner lives after their deaths, but it does strike a different tone from the book. I mean, I said up front that I like this show a lot, so obviously I'm still here for the changes, but it is a fair criticism to lob at the show, one I can't really deny. It just happens to be I really enjoy this version of the story, warts and all. It is fun to read the book after seeing the show, just to spot all the little details, scenarios, and bits of dialogue they peppered throughout the show.
In the night. In the dark.
Journey's end.
In lovers' meeting. I'm like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster.
It's a very liberal adaptation, but also a very creative one. In some ways, it's a more modern story that Mike Flanagan is telling, one that bends genres, often becoming more of a drama with horror elements, and in some cases becoming such a gut-wrenching tragedy that I'm still thinking about this show over a year later. And, hey, what's up with that window? Before we can talk about grief and hidden ghosts, we gotta do the usual rundown. The Haunting of Hill House is a Netflix television series that was written and directed by Mike Flanagan along with a team of 6 other writers. This series was announced on April 17th, 2017, with Flanagan and Trevor Macy as producers. Macy seems to have been working with Flanagan since Oculus in 2013. This series was produced by Amblin and Paramount and began filming in October of 2017 in Atlanta, Georgia. The exteriors for Hill House were filmed at Bisham Manor in LaGrange, Georgia, and interiors for the house were built on a Screen Gem soundstage in Atlanta. The music was composed by the Newton brothers, and most of their previous credits are other Flanagan films. Having watched some of those other films, I will say I think their work on Hill House is my favorite. That piano motif that you hear a lot throughout the show. Yeah, that one. It's really good. Now with that out of the way, let's meet the cast. At the top, there's Stephen Crane, played as an adult by Dutch actor Michiel Huisman and as a child by Paxton Singleton. Stephen is the oldest brother in the Crane family. As a child, he's a remarkably gentle and caring older brother. As an adult, he's sort of too trapped between his own repressed anxieties and frustrations with his family to be much of anything to them. A lot of people really hate Stephen, and I don't. We'll get to that. Next, there's Shirley Crane, played as an adult by Elizabeth Reeser, and Lulu Wilson as a child. Shirley is a funeral home director, and she's hanging on to whatever control she has in her life with a type A grip that's just
Fuck you! Fuck both of you!
Really not sustainable. After her, there's Theo, the middle child, played by Kate Siegel as an adult and McKenna Grace as a kid. She has this touch-based psychic ability that she manages by wearing gloves most of the time. She's established boundaries with most of her family.
Maybe a brick wall when it comes to Luke.
And gets her jollies by having the occasional one-night stand.
You're like a frat guy. I'm a giver.
Then we have the twins. Luke Crane, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen as an adult, and Julian Hilliard as a kid. Luke hasn't coped well with whatever he experienced as a child. Once he was sweet and had an imaginary friend.
She's not imaginary.
But since Hill House...
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7...
he hasn't been doing well. Then his twin sister, Eleanor Crane, aka Nell, played by Victoria Pedretti as an adult and Violet McGraw as a kid, well, she's a little naive and a little soft and just a little bit ill-equipped for the life she got handed. Then we have their father, played as a younger man by Henry Thomas, and Timothy Hutton in the present day. When the kids were young, he was clearly doing his best to be the right kind of strong family man, and in the face of Hill House, he just wasn't able to. In the present day, he's maybe lost touch with reality, or maybe he's the only one who understands what's really happening. Rounding out the main cast, we have Carla Gugino as Olivia Crane, mom to the Crane family, and...
You guys go on without me.
How could we?
We're gonna get to Mama Crane soon. So in the first episode, we meet Stephen Crane, a writer and, shocker, the character that Mike Flanagan most identifies with. He's interviewing this woman about a paranormal encounter.
And there he was, hanging there, upside down.
Clearly, this is our Dr. Montague, but with a twist.
Most times a ghost is a wish.
Stephen's not trying to document paranormal phenomena, he's just getting material for his next book. He even admits to this woman,
I'll need to take some liberties. I always do. I promise to be respectful.
We learn that his first and most popular book is The Haunting of Hill House, an account of his childhood in that haunted house. And the family's not particularly happy with it.
Fuck, Steve.
From there, we get our first glimpse of Nell, alone in a motel room looking distressed. We watch Stephen dodge her call, and then Shirley too. And throughout the episode, we keep getting glimpses at their time at Hill House. There are troubles like Nell's nightmares and difficulty sleeping, Luke's creepy drawings in his treehouse, the slightly strange caretakers, the Dudleys, and this ominous locked red door.
What do you think is in there? What if it's a cotton candy machine? Or a pony? Not a pony.
But nothing to indicate how or where things went wrong.
Daddy, we need more keys! It's an emergency!
From there, we meet Theo, having a night out at the club and a one-night stand with this cute girl Trish, who she promptly dismisses. Also, she wears gloves.
What's that about? I'm just kind of a germaphobe.
Then we finally get to meet Hugh Crane in the modern day. He seems to still be very affected by whatever happened at Hill House, and he's woken by Nell, who calls to tell him,
Do you remember the bent-neck lady?
Yes.
She's back.
and this scares the shit out of him.
Where are you?
I'm at home. In bed.
He tells her to go to Stephen and immediately makes plans to come out there for her. And now we finally get our first glimpse of what the hell happened at Hill House. A young Stephen was woken up in the middle of the night by Hugh, who seemed to be in an absolute panic.
We're gonna run.
Dad, what's going on?
I'm gonna carry you. You keep your eyes closed no matter what.
And we see Hugh get all the children into their car and drive away.
Where's Mom?
That's not Mom!
And he leaves their mother behind. In the present, Hugh calls Stephen and tells him he needs to keep an eye on Nell, and that she's coming to his house now.
I'll see you there. I'll meet you there.
Living at home right now.
And while Stephen settles in for a night of waiting for a ghost, we see Nell dancing through the halls of Hill House. And we see every Crane child jolt awake at exactly 3:03 a.m. Eastern Time.
Now he's in the red room.
And finally, Stephen finishes up his investigation into the woman's home. He concludes that she probably imagined the ghost, but says he might write it up anyway.
I'll need to take some liberties. I always do.
We get another scene from back then where we learn that Hugh kept Hill House, that nobody would be allowed on the grounds except for the Dudleys, and
it sits there and rots.
Also, there's a scene where Mrs. Dudley tells a young Stephen that the staff won't stay in the house after dark.
In the night. In the dark.
Then, in the car, Stephen calls his wife Lee, who we saw in an earlier flashback from before he published the novel. It turns out they've hit a bit of a bad patch.
You know what you'd have to say? Is there any point?
And then he returns to his apartment. And we finally get a good look at a grown-up Luke.
Hey, Luke.
This isn't what it looks like.
And it's just really sad to witness what's become of this family in this moment. These two were so close when they were kids.
Just Stevie and Luke. Cool kids.
And now this is it.
I'm sorry.
I know.
And finally, Stephen goes upstairs to find Nell standing silently in the corner of the room.
You just stood there and watched him loot me? Christ, Nell.
And he gets a call from his dad.
She was at the house. She's dead. She's dead. Steve?
And I'll just take a second to point out here in the midst of the spooks and the bummers that the title of this first episode is Stephen Sees a Ghost. And that is objectively hilarious because
I've never seen a ghost.
But anyway, from there we get to episode 2, Open Casket. It covers much of the same events we saw in episode 1, this time from Shirley's perspective. She's running her funeral home, convincing this child to be chill with an open casket service.
I'm gonna fix her. That's what I do.
Spending some quality time with Theo, and waking up with a start at 3:03 a.m.
Nellie's in the red room.
We also learn her funeral home business is struggling financially because she tends to cut costs when she feels sorry for the grieving families.
Not relief, Cheryl, it's charity.
And once she receives the news about Nell, she decides that they're going to be handling the service.
I'm hosting her funeral. That's that.
Which includes explaining Nell's death to her children while her corpse is in the basement.
Why did she die?
I'm just so sad that she did.
And dealing with the body. In flashbacks, we also learn that their mother had designs for what she called their forever home, which the Cranes would build and move into when they could afford it with all the money they made restoring old houses like Hill House. Also, Shirley adopted some stray kittens, and it went really badly. Hey, there's that window again. Also, her mother's open casket funeral made quite an impact on her.
You fixed her.
And she spent a lot of time and money trying to help Luke get better. But at some point,
I'm sorry, did you say 6,000?
She apparently ran out of time or patience and stopped Luke from going to Nell's wedding.
This is her day. You're not smearing your shit all over her day, Luke.
From there, we get to episode 3, Touch. In this episode, we get to learn more about Theo. She's a child psychologist with a psychic ability that works through touch, hence why she wears gloves most of the time.
You're a lot like me, Kelsey.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Kids like us, who've been through more than other kids. We're great builders. We make ourselves really safe, and no one ever gets in.
And she uses that ability to discover what's plaguing this little girl who has bad dreams about a monster called Mr. Smiley.
I'm so sorry to just drop in on you like this. I was just in the neighborhood, and this is gonna sound really strange, but would you mind if I took a quick look down in your basement?
That's right. And social services, too. You just have to trust me on this. I haven't been wrong before, have I? I'm sure the guy will confess if you just get them here.
Then she gets the news about Nell's death, and she coaches Shirley on how to talk to the kids.
Tell them you're sad, too. Better they ask you than me, because I don't want to have to tell them that I'm fucking pissed at Auntie Nell, who should have known better than most, what this does to a family.
And in this episode, we're shown flashbacks of a young Theo discovering her power.
You know, your dad was telling me a story about the wine you found. How'd you know?
I just guessed.
These will help with the cold. And the other thing.
And we see her standing up for her siblings when the adults around them act increasingly strange.
Your little brother was getting into trouble.
Want to let go of his arm? He's playing with Steadily. Why are you yelling at him?
And a young Luke really wanted to explore this dumbwaiter.
Please, come on. It's a perfect kid-sized elevator.
And it went really badly. We also saw more scenes of the adult Cranes arguing about Steven's book.
It's blood money, Steve. You're welcome to every red cent.
And in the end, Theo took the money.
So what are you gonna do with the money?
I'm gonna get my fucking PhD.
Bless. And in the present day, we see Theo go down to the morgue to see Nell's body, something she couldn't manage earlier in the episode. She touches Nell and... Then she calls Trish for a hookup and...
I just feel kind of weird about how I left the other night.
Is that what you want to talk about?
I mean, I don't know, what do people usually talk about? How was your day? Stuff like that.
I found out that a 9-year-old that I was treating was getting molested by her foster dad. And this kid, she built up so many emotional walls. She just needed help, and no one was listening. So, should we talk about your day, or would you rather come to bed?
Then we get one final flashback of a young Theo being spirited from Hill House on the last night. Hugh touches her, and she sees things she can't fully understand, but...
Let go! Let go of me! Let go! Don't do it!
Touch me.
Hey, newsflash, I'm sad. Then we get to episode 4, The Twin Thing. Episode 4 finds Luke in rehab. From his first day there listening to a blind veteran talking about a burned-up dead girl with runny egg eyes, to his 90th day where he gets up and makes a speech.
I've never had this much time before. 90 days. So, here goes.
We also learn he's on step 4 of the 12-step program and it's kicking his ass. And we meet his friend Joey, who's 9 months clean.
Our sobriety, it's full term. It's a fully formed little baby. Anywhere, 9 months clean as a palace.
Also, this happens. In flashbacks, we see a young Luke find a hat and then get haunted by this tall floating specter. Also, we learn about one of his oldest coping mechanisms.
Mom, Dad, Steven, Cheryl, Theo, you, me. It has to be 7. It helps if you touch each one and count out loud. That keeps you safe. Sometimes you gotta do it a lot.
And we learn about the twin thing.
Once I broke my foot, and Nell called me a few minutes later, and she was just watching TV, and her ankle just went nuts.
We also see a flashback or two of the past 90 days, including a dinner with Steven and Lee where Luke brought Joey.
Look, I get it. She's charming, might even say slick.
Fuck, Steve. I just wanted to bring a friend to dinner, and you're not even giving her a chance.
No, I guess I'm not.
Why not?
I'm fresh out of those. I gave them all to you. Just want you to be careful is all.
In the present, Joey runs away from the facility and Luke goes after her. And over the course of this episode, he seems like he's getting sick or something. We see him break into Steven's place because he's just desperate to find them some cash so he can get Joey off the street for the night.
Hey, Luke. Hey, Steve.
And in the end, Joey steals the money and runs away. And Luke is left alone while his condition worsens. He gets mugged and... It took me a minute to figure it out the first time I watched this episode, but at some point he started rubbing his neck and I realized it's the twin thing. He's feeling Nell's death. Her broken neck and her body slowly growing cold.
I fucked up, okay? But I didn't use, and I'm so fucking cold, and my arms and legs are so stiff.
And on top of all of that, it seems that other ghosts are still haunting him.
Come home, my love.
Finally, Steven comes to find him and...
I'm so sorry, I couldn't help her, but I didn't use.
And he learns about Nell.
You gotta come with me, Luke.
What?
Nell's dead. It was suicide.
Baby. It wasn't.
And hey, breaking news, kids, I'm sad. So with that, let's take a minute to talk about nonlinear storytelling. Nonlinear storytelling, or nonlinear narrative, is pretty much what it says on the tin. Storytelling told out of order, where we are shown events non-chronologically. Hill House is only a recent example of this kind of storytelling. It's a tradition that goes back to the likes of Wuthering Heights and Slaughterhouse-Five, among many, many others. In film, we've got other examples of nonlinear storytelling like Rashomon, Memento, Pulp Fiction, or the French short film La Jetée, which inspired Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys. On television, there were shows like Lost, utilizing a flashback structure to reveal backstory, and more recently, Netflix's The Witcher, which in its first season followed several separate but parallel timelines. There's a lot of reasons to tell a story out of order and a lot of ways to do it. In the case of Memento, the film was told in two timelines, one going backwards and one moving forwards, with the two finally meeting in the middle. The effect was that it created a confusion which mimicked the protagonist's short-term memory loss. Each time a scene began, the audience had to reorient themselves in time and place, much like the protagonist did. In the case of Lost, the flashbacks were usually used to develop characters and provide a deeper understanding of motivations, and occasionally they clarified events that had happened during the actual show's narrative. And The Haunting of Hill House utilizes this nonlinear narrative to break our hearts into tiny little pieces. You see, the structure allows us to learn the nature of events from multiple perspectives, each perspective adding a new layer of truth and understanding to the narrative. And that's because each member of the Crane family only knows their side of the story. They're both informing us with their perspective and limiting our understanding based on the extent of their own knowledge.
You think you know what you saw? You think you know what you wrote? What?
In episode 1 of Hill House, we meet each member of the Crane family, but only with limited glances at each of them, mostly from Steven's perspective. That includes Nell, who by all accounts is not doing well, and at the end of the episode, she dies. But that's just Steven's view. From Shirley's view, we learn a little bit more about the Crane family, then and now, about the distances between most of them, about Luke's attempts at rehabilitation, and about Nell's corpse. From Theo, we learn a little more about her abilities that previous episodes had hinted at, and about the family's response to Steven's book. From Luke, we learn about the twin thing and his drug addiction and current sobriety, in spite of what we thought we saw of him in episode 1. And then finally, in episode 5, we get to Nell. Episode 5, titled Bent Neck Lady, walked up and casually punched me in the face. Because we've been hearing about the Bent Neck Lady since episode 1.
Do you remember the Bent Neck Lady? She's back.
So over the course of the episode, we learn about Nell's husband, Arthur Vance. We learned about their marriage, which we had already seen bits of in previous episodes, and of Nell's nightmares and her sleep paralysis. And then we get to learn about her husband's sudden and tragic demise. And let me take a second in the middle of all of this to talk about Victoria Pedretti, because this is kind of her first major role, and holy shit, she is absolutely gut-wrenching to watch. This scene in particular really hurts to sit through. And from there, we just watch her spiral further and further. All she needs is help and to be heard, but her family can't remain present with her through her grieving because they have their own traumas and problems. In some cases, she lashes out.
I just want to know why.
Or demands more than they can provide.
I can feel him here sometimes.
I am feeling serious fucking concern. That is what I am feeling.
But it's clear that her relationships with her siblings are starting to fracture. And more, she keeps seeing the Bent Neck Lady. So Nell goes back to Boston to face Hill House on what is either the most misguided or misunderstood instructions from her therapist, but she goes back.
It's just a carpet in the woods.
And by the way, her therapist is actually named Dr. Montague and played by Russ Tamblyn, who played Luke Sanderson in the 1963 adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel, so there's an Easter egg. And so we finally arrive at the motel room we saw in episode 1 from her perspective. We see her nightmare of Luke ODing, which led to her calling Steven and Shirley like we saw in earlier episodes.
It's hard to understand, everything's so twisted and it's hard to explain, but I'm worried about Luke.
And we see her call her dad from outside the house.
Nell, where are you?
I'm at home. In bed. I love you, Daddy.
And then she walks into Hill House and into a dream.
Nellie, your mom's looking for you.
Mom? Come on. She's over here.
And whoever or whatever creates this vision, they give her exactly what she wanted.
Sorry for everything I said.
I always should have believed you. You were right.
She wanted to feel seen and heard and loved.
Thanks for believing in me, Nellie. It did the trick.
And then the house gives her Arthur. Except it's not Arthur. None of this is real and there's no one here. As we saw in episode 1, there's the harsh reality of Nell dancing alone in the empty house, but now we see her view of this moment. And then the dream gets stripped away a piece at a time as the house sinks its claws into Nell. Her mother invites her up to the Red Room for a tea party, and slowly, bits of reality start to seep in. Her mother offers her this locket, the one Olivia had promised to give her someday when she was a child.
It's yours now.
In the commentary for this episode, Mike Flanagan said there was a cruelty in this moment, although the ghost of her mother thought it was a mercy.
Mom? It's okay, honey.
As reality comes back a little more, Nell wears a noose and stands on the edge of this little landing.
Mommy.
And then all she has to do...
It's time to wake up, sweetheart.
...is fall. And it's here that the real terror sets in. Over this 2-minute sequence, we learn with a sense of inevitable, utter horror that Nell was the bent-neck lady the whole time. Every vision of her was just a vision of Nell's own future haunting her whole life right up until her death. You see, it's all a matter of perspective. Of course, we still don't fully understand what happened at Hill House when they were children. The last 4 episodes will slowly unravel that from the perspective of the parents. But Hill House uses nonlinear storytelling to engage us in the tale, to keep us asking not necessarily what happened, but how, where we already know the outcome, but the journey to that destination is revealed to us one layer at a time. Nell has a speech in the final episode about time.
I thought for so long that time was like a line, that our moments were laid out like dominoes, and that they fell one into another, but I was wrong. It's not like that at all. Our moments fall around us like rain.
And so it seems, in Flanagan's world, the dead don't experience time in a linear way, and so neither do we as the viewers. Flanagan said in the commentary for that episode,
this speech about how time is not a line, this kind of rebuke of cause and effect within a ghost story, this concept was part of the original concept of the entire show. And the format of every episode was all in service to this idea.
And it works. It works so well to give us this whole story where each character's individual understanding of events unlocks a little more of it for us. It's a cool way to build a narrative. One that breaks my goddamn heart, but there it is. So now let's talk about writer-director Mike Flanagan. After watching Hill House, I sought out other works by Mike Flanagan. Because the writing and direction seemed so distinct, I wondered if maybe I had found a new favorite filmmaker. I didn't watch his entire oeuvre, but I watched most of it, and over all of those movies I developed an appreciation for Flanagan's style. So let's talk about the guy. Flanagan was born on May 20th, 1978 in Salem, Massachusetts. He only spent his first 3 months there before moving somewhere else. Apparently he moved a lot as a child since his father was a member of the Coast Guard who would go off on deployments for months at a time. Meanwhile, Flanagan was apparently a very sensitive kid. He speaks of watching movies through his fingers and an episode of Fraggle Rock with the Tunnel of Ghosts that scarred him as a child. He says that around 5th grade he picked up the book It by Stephen King and started reading.
And in 5th grade I graduated finally to Stephen King, and I thought that somehow that would be less traumatic reading his books than watching horror movies, and I was so wrong.
And then he kept reading anyway. He described it as an exercise in being brave, or bravery in tiny increments. Later in life, he developed a love for the genre when he realized that horror could be about deeper themes underneath all the terror and disturbing imagery. He says he spent much of his college years getting acquainted with all the classic horror everyone had seen already. His first film, Absentia, was produced through Kickstarter and made a big splash at festivals. From there, he was able to make his pet project Oculus in 2013, starring Karen Gillan, and from there, the man's been working ever since. He released Hush, Before I Wake, and Ouija, Origin of Evil in 2016. In 2017, he directed Gerald's Game, and then in 2018, he directed Hill House, followed by a sequel to The Shining called Dr. Sleep that was released last year. Currently, he's working on a season 2 of Hill House. It's going to be called The Haunting of Bly Manor, based on the 1898 novella The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. After that, he's working on a movie called Midnight Mass, which you might have spotted a book version of in Gerald's Game or Hush. So after watching a lot of the guy's work, I can say the world of Mike Flanagan is haunted by small details, by objects. Anything could become an object of fear in Flanagan's world. A bed, a mirror, a doorknob, a house. Something as simple as a hat can become a source of horror in a world built by Flanagan. And death, or the ephemeral and monstrous manifestations of it, are hungry.
This room is like the heart of the house. No, not a heart, a stomach.
Evil is something that consumes. It digests. The rest of the time it waits, hungry and unseen for the time to strike. Flanagan talked a bit about his fascination with death in an interview.
You know, it's like my grandfather died. My parents are like, well, now he's always watching over you. And I was like, well, that sounds really creepy, horrible. Like, always?
Yeah.
Like, what did he do wrong? And like the mysteries of the universe are rolled out in front of him, but they're like, no, we really need you just to like...
Just watch over...
Keep an eye on Mike.
Watch over Mikey.
Yeah.
And you get the feeling watching his films that he might be working through something, exorcising some demons and putting them up on screen. He said that many of his films are just recreations of things that scare him. The horror comes from the scary imagery, sure, but it also comes from within these broken people. Also, he keeps casting the cutest children on this earth and doing horrible things to them. Jesus, leave the babies alone, Michael. And he loves to write a monologue. Often he'll film them in single, unbroken takes. Nowadays, he apparently often shoots these scenes without extra coverage, so the edit must remain on that single take. And speaking of long takes, let's take a minute to talk about episode 6 of Hill House, titled Two Storms. The show was apparently pitched around the idea that in the middle of the season there would be an episode that appears to play in real time.
One of the things that I've found when you're going through a profound loss, especially an unexpected loss, time itself and the air in the room, kind of everything changes. It's such a heightened reality that you find yourself in. And so this episode was always meant to capture that.
It was filmed in 5 long takes, 3 taking place in the funeral home and 2 inside Hill House. Both sets were built with this episode in mind, constructed on adjacent stages with a hallway joining them so Timothy Hutton as Hugh Crane could walk from one set to the other on camera. On March 26, 2018, the production shut down to start rehearsing the episode. Initially, episode 6 was going to be filmed last, but due to budgetary reasons, it was moved up, which shortened the amount of time everybody had to prepare for it. And then on April 6th, they began filming. Over the episode, there's a lot of technical wizardry that one would never think about or see. An entire crew literally running behind the camera rig to remain out of frame, a special lighting grid timed to follow the actors and keep them properly lit as they move around the sets, swapping out the dummy of Victoria Pedretti's corpse with her younger counterpart, or one shot where all the other Crane siblings swap out with their younger versions and then swap back. Carla Gugino had to continually appear on opposite ends of these hallways, which involved the actress or a body double walking across camera only to duck into some hidden door and run to her next mark. Sometimes the children were literally picked up by crew members and carried off camera because the kids couldn't run fast enough to get out of frame. Also, when Victoria Pedretti appears throughout the episode as the bent-neck lady and disappears within the same take, apparently her bent-neck lady makeup involved contact lenses to make her eyes look white and she couldn't see a thing, so she would have to be guided to her marks by crew members and then pulled out once her moment was done. During the 3rd shot of the episode, which lasted 17 minutes in the funeral home, they needed to use a special rig called a Pee-wee dolly so they could track the actors from sitting to standing. Apparently, the regular Steadicam rigs don't adjust to different heights without somebody stopping the camera to fiddle with the settings, so they had the special dolly, and they only had one, and over the course of the day, the dolly was getting harder and harder to maneuver around the set. They learned later that the special wheels, which didn't leave marks on the carpet, were also not meant for carpet. So over the course of the day and several months of rehearsal prior to filming, the mechanism had gotten gummed up with carpet fibers. They pushed through and didn't tell the actors it was breaking in case the knowledge footage affected their performances. When they finally got the full scene, the dolly broke immediately afterwards. Also, my favorite little factoid might be that none of these takes are perfect. It was just about what mistakes they could live with. Mistakes like this one. I mean, the meat of the episode can't be ignored either in all of this. It largely amounts to the day before Nell's funeral when the family finally gathers together to absorb their loss. They fight, they reminisce, and they make mistakes. Nobody is at their best in this episode, but they are at their most human. Meanwhile, in flashback, we see a night when a storm battered the house and Nell disappeared. And in the present, it seems like Nell's ghost is trying to get their attention. To what end we can't yet discern, but she's trying to be heard by them, seen by them. And the part I find particularly gutting is this final moment here with Luke by Nell's casket, which toppled mysteriously a few minutes ago, and we hear little Nell's voice as the adult Luke in the present walks away.
I was right here. I was right here. The whole time. None of you could see me. Nobody could see me.
Hey, that hurts. On the subject of two storms, Flanagan said,
I don't know if I'll ever be as proud of anything as I am of this episode, of this show. I'm always going to be amazed that this worked. I never want to do it again.
I mean, whatever the case may be, I think Flanagan's an interesting filmmaker. Also, there are hidden ghosts. Just keep an eye out. There are hidden ghosts all over the place in Hill House. That one right there is played by Bruce Greenwood. It's a cool little detail, and a lot of the set design for Hill House included faces because Flanagan said he wanted it to feel like the house was watching them. So now with that out of the way, let's talk about the rest of the show. Over the next few episodes, we learn a lot of things about what happened at Hill House. The house being overrun with black mold and Hugh's panic over how they were ever going to be able to fix it up enough to actually sell it as a renovated home. He also hurt his hand when he accidentally stuck it into a running fan, so that's what's with the bandages on his hands that we've seen sporadically since episode 1. We learn that the house has an effect on people, one that can often grow over time. Mr. Dudley tells Hugh about how Mrs. Dudley stopped spending the night at Hill House after she lost her baby and grew increasingly scattered, saying she could hear her baby crying at night in the house. She got better when she stopped staying in Hill House after dark. Meanwhile, Olivia Crane has been growing increasingly erratic due to the house's influence.
You just tired?
It just snuck up on me all of a sudden.
From her side, we see visions of ghosts and a blurring of waking and dreams.
Are we safe with you, Mommy? Are we really?
Mom?
The house and a few of its darker spirits exert an influence on Olivia.
No more bad dreams, no more screaming memes. You'd wake them up and you'd keep them just perfect, just like they is.
Eventually, they convince her that the only way to keep her children safe and happy is to kill them. Of course, the older children have already been corrupted by the world in her eyes. It's too late for them.
You grew up so fast. Kittens need their mommies and then they don't.
So she has a tea party with Nell and Luke's imaginary friend, Abigail. And there have been references to the baby that the Dudleys lost and to their current child, who we never hear named, only vaguely referenced in passing.
My little one is better with me. I know it well.
So when Olivia holds a tea party for the kids and the tea is laced with rat poison, we realize that Abigail isn't imaginary, and eventually we learn this is the Dudleys' child.
She wasn't in her bed.
I didn't know.
But Hugh comes in and interrupts the tea party before either Luke or Nell can take a drink. And in his panic, he throws Olivia against the wall. Hard. Then one by one, he spirits the children out of the house, but now we know that phantom we saw in episode 1 was actually Olivia limping after them with her now sprained ankle. Then Hugh takes all the children to a motel and goes to talk with the police. His answers are understandably strange and vague since it would be difficult to explain the true nature of the night's events.
The 3 hours you waited, after you discovered her body, before you called us, what happened in those 3 hours, Hugh?
I was in shock. I was mourning.
And that goes pretty poorly for him. He loses custody of the children who go to live with their aunt, but more importantly, he loses their trust because he refuses to be honest with them about what really happened.
You all back in
information. Even if I held back anything, it was to protect you kids. Why do I need protection from the truth?
And without that information, all the Crane kids form their own understanding of what happened back then, of what was wrong with their mother and what really happened to her.
I saw the police reports. Her skull cracked like a melon. There was blood all over the library carpet.
Okay, Steve.
And a contusion on the back of her head from being shoved into a wall.
And they all learned to cope with the grief and trauma of those events. And this show has a lot on its mind when it comes to grief.
Most times a ghost is a wish.
About how it makes time move differently, or about how it marks a family.
Because I don't want to have to tell them that I'm fucking pissed at Auntie Nell, who should have known better than most. What this does to a family.
Of course, many of you might already know that Mike Flanagan said each of the 5 Crane children represented one of the 5 stages of grief. Stephen is denial, Shirley is anger, Theo is bargaining, Luke is depression, and Nell is acceptance. Arguably, Nell only really reaches that stage after her death, but there it is. And with the rest of the Crane kids still stuck in the unfinished process of grieving, they've never really dealt with the trauma of what happened back at Hill House, or what's happened since. Instead, they've been building up coping mechanisms. One could go so far as to call them walls.
We're great builders. We make ourselves really safe, and no one ever gets in.
In episode 7, when they hold Nell's funeral, Luke gives a touching eulogy.
I was born 90 seconds before Nell, but she was always my big sister.
And then he sees Nell's ghost, as well as the ghost of his mother, at Nell's grave.
Don't.
Stephen tells him to get it together because he's been seeing things too, but he believes it's just their mental illness that runs in their family.
I don't want to bury you too, you understand?
We also learn that present-day Hugh's scattered talking to himself thing is actually him conversing with an imagined version of Liv, not the real Olivia, or even her ghost. It really is just him talking to himself, trying to coach himself through dealing with his children, trying to get it all right, just this once.
And I'm sorry I wasn't there. And it's the regret of my life. I'm so sorry that I couldn't fix it.
Also, shit is getting weird around the funeral home. And then, at the end of episode 7, Luke runs away. We learn in episode 8 he went to Hill House to burn it down, which goes not well. And right now, I just want to take a minute to talk about these traumatized idiots with their shit coping mechanisms bouncing off each other like pinballs. I love these idiots. All of these idiots. Which is apparently something of an unpopular opinion, since a lot of people really hate Stephen and Shirley, but we'll get to them in a minute. There's a scene in episode 8 when Hugh talks about witness marks.
There are scars. Little marks inside the clock. Scrapes, lines, divots from tools, gears, pieces removed from the clock. They're basically evidence of repairs that have been done to the clock and what the clock was. Witness marks tell the story of the piece, if you know how to read them.
Because here's the thing about trauma. When it's left to fester, when truths are withheld, and 5 children grow up to be adults who had to process the suicide or possible murder of their mother on top of all the other fucked up shit they experienced at Hill House, which they had to rationalize somehow. Some of them believe it was real. Others think it was a dream or a hallucination or an overactive imagination. But keeping the truth from them, I mean, they were going to be messed up either way, but it probably didn't help. The time they spent at Hill House, where they experienced terrible things and then they were told those things didn't happen, or they were just dreams, or they were told nothing at all of that, on top of the way it ended, it damaged them. It damaged all of them. And all of them processed that damage in different ways. But they are still walking around carrying those scars, those witness marks. None of them have properly dealt with their trauma, and so many of their interactions with each other are harsh, or even cruel, as their various traumas bounce off of one another. They're all pretty much a hair trigger away from a total meltdown, keeping it together by the skin of their teeth. Some manage by setting boundaries, some manage with drugs or therapy, or with rationalizing every strange thing into a neat little box that can be categorized and filed away. So with that, let's take a minute to talk about Stephen and Shirley. Because I don't think I need to explain Theo to you. Honestly, Theo's great. Hard-edged but with a heart of gold, using her psychic powers to uncover cases of child molestation. Honestly, she could have her own TV show. I'd watch it. Also, this scene?
I didn't see him. I didn't see him. I didn't see him. I didn't see him.
This scene hurts my soul. I don't think you need me to explain Luke. Poor, poor Luke. I mean, we know he made some mistakes in the past, but we don't actually see the worst of them beyond him convincing Nell to buy him some drugs and showing up high to Nell's wedding. It sounds like he did worse things, but he's so contrite. He knows how bad all of his actions are as he struggles with that fearless moral inventory and trying to do right by his friend and his family. Luke's easy to love because he's so open and vulnerable. You just want to wrap him up in a blanket and protect him from the shit he's going through. And I definitely don't need to explain Nell. Sweet, tragic Nell, doomed to exist in purgatory after her death and haunted by that death for her entire life. Sure, she did a couple less than great things, but it seems like all she wanted was for her family to be together and be happy.
It's funny, Nellie was always trying to get all of us together in one place.
I think a lot of the weird shit the family experiences, particularly in episode 6, is just Nell trying to get them to stop fighting. Also, that one time Nell came out of hiding to shame Sister Kind. Yeah. But sometimes trauma doesn't make you sweet or vulnerable. Sometimes it makes you mean, or it makes you cold. Sometimes it makes you Shirley, and it makes you Steven. I have a harder time with Shirley, honestly. Not because I don't understand her, but just because that kind of type A controlling behavior, well, I've known a few people like that, but I do understand why she does everything she does. And I will say, she has a few moments in episode 6 that get me like this one.
To fix her makeup.
Also, this scene is hilarious. I have fought with my sisters like this. It's so fucking funny.
Did you just punch me in the boob?
Yeah. Yeah!
Yes, she cheated on her husband, Kevin. A brief but harrowing mistake, and then she kept it from Kevin for years, which is a much bigger mistake, but a very human one. As human as Luke's drug addiction or Theo's walls that she builds to keep the world out. I get it. And I hope after the events of this season she gets better and maybe a little less controlling. Also, I really love her relationship with Theo. I love their banter in the early episodes.
I'm a giver.
You're like a guy. Worse than a guy. You're like a frat guy.
I love how they fight.
Did you just punch me in the boob?
Yeah.
I love how they resolve it.
And I felt scared. I felt so fucking scared that I was gonna lose the only sister that I had left. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please. Just please.
Just perfect. So now let's talk about everybody's least favorite character, Stephen Crane. Fun fact, I took a nonfiction writing class in college, and our teacher discussed the struggle that most nonfiction writers deal with, whether or not to publish the autobiographical works that might include their friends and family. Not everybody likes to read about themselves from somebody else's perspective, and my teacher talked about how some writers said they literally wouldn't publish some pieces until the people in them were dead, and others just published the work.
The fuck, Steve?
I don't hate Stephen for writing the book. I can see how it was probably really cathartic to write, and sure, he published it for somewhat mercenary reasons, offering to share the profits with his siblings, which is about the only thing he could do at that point. Could he have not published the book? Kept it as a mental health exercise? Sure, but he didn't, and I get why he wrote it. I'm not mad at him for that. And I'm not mad at him for the moments when he lashes out at his siblings, because they all lash out at each other. They're all just damaged people, ill-equipped to handle the cards they've been dealt. I am mad at him for lying to Lee for years about the vasectomy, though. That really sucks. To go so far that they're seeing fertility doctors and talking like this?
Taking temperature and mucus levels. We've been planning and pacing intercourse.
Hey, Stephen, that sucks. You should have told your wife that you were scared to pass on whatever mental illness you thought ran in your family. And you know, I didn't love Stephen right away.
I prefer preternatural.
The first inkling that he would be one of my favorite characters was this moment. Stephen kept a pretty tight grip on his composure right up until this moment, and something about the way he just falls apart here
Positive ID. That's Nellie, all right, and she's dead.
Really got to me. A first glimpse beneath that hard shell of rationality he'd built up. And then that scene with Luke in episode 7.
I don't want to bury you too, you understand?
Or in episode 8.
I miss my mom.
But it's this moment in the final episode when Steven crawled into my heart and stayed there.
Look at me.
For a moment, you can see the terrified little kid that still lives in there. That kid who needs some kind of support from his dad because he's just so fucking scared and like, yeah, I love Steven, you guys. Sorry. He's an idiot, but he's a sympathetic one to me. And I love all the Crane kids. I really do. One of the remarkable things about Hill House was how eloquently it built up these characters and made us understand each of them and their motivations. Was it occasionally a little on the nose?
You fixed her.
Maybe. But damn if it wasn't extremely effective. Some may be inclined to say, well, Nell had it worse because of the bent neck lady, or Luke with his addiction and that. But trauma isn't a contest, and there is no winner. The different levels of their experiences don't really matter when it made all of them who they are today. So at the end of the day, we have a show about trauma and grief with characters that represent the stages of it, and hey, seriously, what was with that fucking window?
I am home, I thought, and stopped in wonder at the thought. I am home. I am home. Now to climb.
I love that little monologue, taken in part from Shirley Jackson's original novel, much like the speech we hear at the opening of the first episode and the end of the finale.
Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House.
That same narration bookends the beginning and end of the novel, except the show made one small variation, but we'll get to that. Episode 10 of Hill House, Silence Lay Steadily, finds the Cranes back home, or in what was once a home. At the beginning of the episode, we see a flashback to a scene from episode 1.
What do you think is in there? What if it's a cotton candy machine? Or a pony?
And we see another scene from episode 3. Only now do we understand that Theo was in the red room. The strange banging on the door, the twisting of the knob, those were her sisters on the other side of that door. And in the present, the house sinks its teeth into each of the Crane children.
Shirley!
And it's Nell who saves each of them. One by one, she pulls Steven, Shirley, and Theo out of their Hill House nightmares. And they find themselves in this room with a familiar-looking window. Meanwhile, it appears that Luke injected himself with rat poison. Of course, we learn he didn't really do that. That Hill House made him do it in the same dreamlike way it made Nell hang herself and Olivia throw herself off of that balcony. So one by one, the other Cranes are woken up from their dreams and they all gather around Luke to try and help him.
His pulse. Fucking there, Luke.
And we're treated to one more vision as Luke sits on the brink of death. He wakes up in the Red Room at a tea party with Abigail, Nell, and Olivia, but it's not really Olivia anymore. People on the internet have all figured this out, but the Hill House ghost of Olivia wears that red bathrobe. When Liv was alive, she wore a blue bathrobe. This is what survives of Olivia now, this warped spirit who literally wants to love her children to death. So she tells Luke that he's home, that he's awake, but the most important bit is Nell.
Go.
Whatever control she exerts in this house, she's still using it to reach him here.
Don't.
And Luke begins to fight against whatever this dream is until Nell is there to get him out. And then we get to my favorite scene in this show.
You just woke up. You were gone.
She saved me.
I love this scene.
I feel a little clearer just now.
I love it so much.
We have. No? All of us have.
Initially, none of them understand her or even what's happening, and Luke really needs medical attention. But as they keep talking,
I feel like I've been here before.
We have. All of us have. So many times and we didn't know it.
And Nell tells them that time's been out of order, that time is not a line.
Our moments fall around us like rain, or snow, or confetti.
And she tells them that they've all been inside the Red Room.
This room is like the heart of the house. No, not a heart, a stomach.
That strange narrow window was the one detail the house couldn't hide from them. A clue for a watchful audience member.
Put on different faces so that we'd be still and quiet while it digested.
And after she explains it all to them, Nell finally gets a moment with each of her siblings.
I don't know how to do this without you.
I learned a secret. There's no without. am not gone. I'm scattered into so many pieces, sprinkled on your life like new snow.
It's not like the manufactured moments the house gave her before her death.
I'm so sorry her last words were in anger.
They weren't her last.
It's real and heartfelt.
I'm sorry that I didn't answer the phone. But you did. So many times.
I'm sorry if I didn't listen, and I'm sorry.
Wouldn't have changed anything. I need you to know that.
And she tells them,
forgiveness is warm, like a tear on a cheek. Think of that and of me when you stand in the rain.
And as quickly as she appeared, she's gone. And on the other side of that door, Hugh and Olivia's ghosts talk about being parents.
Even if they're broken or addicted or joyless, or yes, even if they die, we have to watch it all because we're parents. And that's the deal we make. Whatever that life is, we bear witness.
It's a horror.
It doesn't have to be.
Which, like, I'm not a parent, but Flanagan is, and I thought this was a beautiful little meditation on parenthood. So Hugh makes a deal with Liv. He says he'll stay there with her if she lets the kids go.
Journey's end.
Your lovers' meeting.
And so Hugh frees them from the Red Room. And there's this little moment here as Hugh and Steven carry Luke out where they definitely spotted Hugh's corpse and oof, that hurts. But they all get out of the house. Shirley, Theo, and Luke pile into a car and head for the hospital, but Hugh and Steven stay behind for that final piece of truth he'd kept secret this whole time.
Why are you here? Did you see? What happened? Our daughter snuck out of her bed tonight and we thought maybe.
We learned about the death of Mr. and Mrs. Dudley's daughter, Abigail, at Olivia's hands.
What happened? Who hurt you, baby girl?
And his deal with them to keep Hill House so they could visit and see her again.
Keep everyone else away. Let it starve. But leave it here. So I can see her.
And then, for those who didn't realize it already, we come back to see Hugh's body lying on that little balcony. And his ghost tells Steven,
some things can't be told. You live them, or you don't.
And he entrusts Steven with the house, and with the promise to keep it. And he tells him,
I want you to know, you and your sisters and your brother never been prouder of anything.
Dad, I was so lucky to be your dad.
And then he goes to join Liv and Nell, and this shot haunts me to this day because just look at their faces. Look at Nell's face. She's not happy that the house got him too. After she spent this whole episode protecting her siblings from it, the house got her dad, and just, there's so much happening in those final moments we see of her. And then Steven leaves the house, slowly but surely, with a wall of ghosts watching him go. But he does get to leave Hill House here. He gets to see Luke alive and recovering at the hospital, and he gets to go home to Lee as we hear this voiceover again.
I am home, I thought, and stopped in wonder at the thought. I am home. Now to climb.
So, in interviews and commentaries and podcasts, Flanagan was asked a lot about the way this show ended, about if there would be a season 2 with the Crane family and the choice to end their story. Some people debated whether or not the Crane story did end happily. Theories were abound about whether or not they ever actually escaped the Red Room. In one interview, he said, "We toyed with the idea for a little while that over that monologue, over the image of the family together, we would put the Red Room window in the background. For a while, that was the plan. Maybe they never really got out of that room. The night before it came time to shoot it, I sat up in bed and I felt guilty about it. I felt like it was cruel." In the same interview, he says, "We had been through so much in the course of writing it. Each of us had dug so deep into our own families and stories to try and inform the show that we all craved a moment of peace at the end." In the commentary, he talks a lot about the ending of 6 Feet Under. The final scene is a montage that skips ahead into the future to show us where they all end up. Flanagan found that ending pretty impactful, and he said he was hoping his ending would have a similar impact. So we see Steven and Lee begin to work towards fixing their marriage. We see the Dudleys come back to Hill House in their final moments to be with their children again. We see Shirley tell Kevin the truth. We see Theo with Trish moving out of Shirley's guest house and leaving her gloves behind. And we see Luke celebrating 2 years of sobriety. And Stephen tells us again in voiceover.
Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and those who walk there walk together.
After everything this family went through and experienced and did to themselves and each other, they get to be together and they get to move on. And so here's the thing with this show, the theme that I pulled out when I tried to unpack it. These characters spend so long bottling up their emotions and their anger and not listening to each other, and when they finally start actually talking and listening, they start to heal. There's no right way to forgive a person who hurt you, and all of the Cranes hurt each other. Luke lied and stole from all of them. Theo blocked people out, Nell lashed out, Shirley was controlling, and Stephen published a book that hurt them. And that's not including their parents. One lied and withheld the truth for years, and the other, towards the end of her life, was erratic and literally attempted to murder 2 of her children. It's hard to watch this show sometimes and see how cruel they all are to each other, each with their own set of scars and traumas, bouncing off each other the way they do. And here's a tough pill to swallow. People in your life will hurt you, in little and big ways. Your family, your friends, or your significant others. And you will hurt them, because people are imperfect, broken things, and everyone is carrying around scars from something, and that damage might cause you or those around you to do regrettable things.
People fuck up. I guess you don't get that. You don't really get it until you fuck up. Really fuck up.
What can define you is how you deal with that hurt. You can hang on to it bitterly for years. You can deny the parts of it that are too painful. You can try to put the pain away or simply lose yourself to it. Or you can finally talk to one another and listen, like really listen, until you can accept it and move on. There's no right way to forgive somebody, and some people don't necessarily deserve your forgiveness. But in the case of the Crane family, who Flanagan felt had earned their happy ending,
forgiveness is warm, like a tear on a cheek.
There's a poem by Merritt Malloy that I think of when I watch this show, or when my best friend calls me up to say, "Hey, I got sad about the bent-neck lady today." The poem is called Epitaph. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother, walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give to them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, and if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not on your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Or to put it another way,
I loved you completely. And you loved me the same. That's all. The rest is confetti.
So I'll say right here and now, I think other people might pull out very different themes from this show. Some might say it's a show about parenthood and about having to let your children grow, or I don't know. The forgiveness stuff is just what I get out of it the most. Basically, this outline is 26 pages long, so I figured I would let the other stuff about the forever home and all that rest. Feel free to tell me your own theories about stuff I didn't get to in the comments section. And thank you to my patrons whose names you saw in the credits. For anybody who is so inclined, I have a Patreon and it's linked in the description. And that's all for now. Thank you all for watching, and see you on the next one.